I've never really seen it as a debate. It's just stupid.
He just should have tried harder to get on that door.
But if you really want to unearth all the dumbass arguments associated with it...
Could you lip squeeze him?
No comment.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Titanic turned 25 last year, which means that if it were a person, Leonardo wouldn't be able to date it anymore.
Like I said, I have no comment.
But alas, here we are, all these years later, dozens of billionaires in submarines trying and hilariously failing to get to the bottom of this case. A case that has divided an entire continent and still has every talk show host asking James Cameron through the next 16 Avatar sequel press runs.
Could Jack have fit on that door?
Could Jack have fit on the door with Rose?
Where are we currently on the Jack getting on the board?
Have you ever thought, I wish I let Jack live?
No.
Well, if you don't know, then spoiler alert, Your Honor, but at the end of the movie Titanic, based on the boat of the same name, she sinks. And in the film, my client, Jack Dawson, played by 90s Hollywood heartthrob and noted frequenter of YouTube greatest acting of all time compilations, Leonardo DiCaprio, nobly sacrifices his life so that his crew's fling, Rose, can survive by floating on a door in the freezing cold Atlantic Ocean. And since then, everyone, including the Mythbusters, internet commentators, various physicists, historians, and even the cast and crew of the movie itself have all weighed in to determine if my client's sacrifice was even necessary at all. And for years, scholars and pundits insisted it wasn't. I mean, look at all that space. But recently, it seems there's been a shift in opinion. Look anywhere online and you'll be told no, he couldn't fit, it was impossible, Jack had to die. But who's right? What if? Like an iceberg, it goes deeper than that. Over the course of this trial, we'll delve into the science of the cold, buoyancy, and debunk the very biased and manipulative state witness James Cameron by examining real historical documents and materials used on the actual Titanic in order to prove once and for all why my client, Jack Dawson, is in fact guilty of being able to fit on the door. Now let's just get some things out of the way here first, Your Honor. Before you comment, yes, I know, it's not technically a door. In fact, if we look at the script, we're actually looking at a intricately carved piece of wooden debris thing, which if we look at these set photos and reference photos from the actual boat itself, can confirm the object is in fact not a door, but an archway above a door. But for the rest of the trial, let's just agree to just call it a door because that's just what the internet has called it for the past 25 years. And simultaneously, we're not just judging whether or not Jack can fit on the door, Your Honor, but whether or not he can fit and survive. Otherwise, what the hell is the point of talking about any of this anyway? But still, for the sake of brevity, I'll just be saying fit. But know that when I do, I really mean fit and also survive. With all that out of the way, let's get this trial going, shall we? In 2012, key witness for the defense, the Mythbusters, aired an episode proving exactly why Jack could indeed fit on the door. But last year, filmmaker and extremely biased state witness James Cameron came out and attempted to prove the opposite, that it wasn't possible for Jack to fit and survive in a follow-up documentary. But why the two different conclusions? What factors are at play here? There are several key facts in dispute over this case, which we will go through point by point today. First, the door itself, then the cold, and of course, the hand of God factor, or in other words, the script. To start, let's crack this door wide open. And funnily enough, Your Honor, we know exactly just how big the door is, because it sold at auction earlier this year. The door measures in at exactly 8 feet long and 41 inches wide. Much like my penis. Now, I hate to expose a short king, Your Honor, but according to IMDb, Leo comes in at a whopping 5'11", and Kate Winslet at 5'6½", which gives plenty of head and foot clearance for both. Width, however, is trickier, but even if we assume they both fall at roughly the average shoulder width of an American in the 1990s, that puts them both at about 15 inches wide each, still well within the parameters of the door itself. However, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I know exactly what you're thinking. Size, in this case, doesn't matter at all. Something the prosecution is waiting for his wife to tell him, I'm sure. Either way, so what if there's enough space on the door? Wouldn't it just sink beneath both their weight? That brings us to our second point. Buoyancy. The door's ability to float mostly depends on what types of wood it could be made from. Now, there's conflicting sources on what exactly the wood could be, but let's have a look at all our most likely candidates and see how they all perform under laboratory conditions. The first and most obvious candidate is balsa, which we know for a fact is what the actual film prop is made from. And wouldn't you know it, balsa is literally among the lightest and floatiest commercial hardwoods on the market. So floaty and buoyant, in fact, it's often a key building material in small boats and surfboards. Though you might say, hang on, this is just the film prop we're talking about here. Obviously, they want this thing to float on a movie set for as long as possible. But what about in real life, on the real Titanic, where evidently staying afloat wasn't as big a concern? As we established earlier, the prop is based on real historical photographs. So what would it be made of in real life? And would it be as floaty? In the much discussed Mythbusters episode, which James Cameron has famously gone on to say is, quote, full of shit, he himself claimed that the door allegedly was made of white oak.
And then I'm going to put them on a piece of wood that is exactly the same type of wood as the original.
Right, so white oak.
Yes.
And this is probably true. According to the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, the director based the door on a piece of recovered paneling from the real Titanic, currently on display at the museum, which just so happens to be made of oak. And how buoyant is oak? Well, the short answer is not very. Balsa is 85% less dense than water, whereas oak is only 25% less dense. So still floaty, but a much greater gamble. This internet physicist, in fact, has done much of the work for us. They did the math to prove that if the wood used for the door was indeed oak, then it would absolutely sink, because the force of Jack and Rose's collective body weight pushing down is greater than the force of the buoyancy pushing the door up and out of the water. And at first glance, I'll admit, to the untrained eye, this is bulletproof. I mean, they literally did the math. It's impossible. How are Jack and Rose supposed to float then? But listen, I have an arts degree and I'm not even a real lawyer, so take all this with a grain of salt. But speaking of salt, Your Honor, these calculations forget completely to account for the added buoyancy of ocean salt water. And salt water is not actually this dense. It's this dense, making it a hell of a lot floatier than regular fresh water. And as a matter of fact, these aren't even the correct measurements for the door, Your Honor. Based on the prop that went up for auction last year, these are. Knowing this, let's do some math. Plugging our new numbers in, we'll find that our new buoyancy force pushing the raft up is 3,839 newtons. And because the force of Jack and Rose pressing down on the raft, 3,577 newtons, is less than that, that means they float. Therefore, Your Honor, even if the door was made of oak, as the state alleges, the densest possible wood that was used in the building of the Titanic, the door is still light enough to float, based on our calculations. And don't just take my word for it.
Why don't you tell me your name and what it is you do?
My name is Guy Lakenby. I'm a PhD candidate at UBC studying nuclear astrophysics.
Amazing. So you would say you're somebody who's qualified to look at math.
I spend most of my day sorting through math, so yes.
Excellent. My first correction, the density for water there that they have, 1,000 kilograms per meter cubed. So I corrected it to 1,030 kilograms per meter cubed. Would you say that that is more accurate?
Yes, for sure. I think when I looked this up, the saltwater varies across the ocean between 1,025 to 1,035, and so I think 1,030 is right in the middle, and if anything, a bit of conservative estimate because water in the Titanic was very cold and very salty.
Excellent, excellent. So my second correction there is they weren't quite accurate on the measurements for the actual door itself. If those are the correct measurements, would that give us our final number there, 3,839 newtons of buoyancy force?
Okay, alrighty, I'm getting 3839.03, so you are bang on the money.
Would it be fair to say then that my calculations are correct and they both could have survived and floated on the door.
So you're concluding that the buoyancy force should be 3839, which would be larger than 35377. So yes, can't argue with that. The buoyancy force is larger than the weight of the two of them, so it seems to me that the door would float.
No further questions, Your Honor.
So that covers buoyancy. But this is under ideal conditions, my dear jury. So if the Titanic had sank in Cancun, perhaps Jack would have survived. But alas, almost none of the victims from the real disaster died from drowning. They died from immersion hypothermia, from prolonged exposure to the cold water and frigid Arctic air. This was a major point of contention in the State Witness's 2023 follow-up documentary, in which he attempted to demonstrate this very same theory, that even if the door was large enough and could support their weight, one or both of them would have just died from hypothermia anyway. So it was more practical to save one and let the other live. Now, hypothermia is deadly enough on its own when induced by exposure to cold air, but direct contact with cold water can cool the body down up to 24 times faster than the air. According to the University of Minnesota, in near-frozen water, similar to the type seen in Titanic, one can only expect to survive for 45 minutes at best, and 15 at the worst, even with a life jacket, before the heart and brain stop functioning. Titanic survivors report that the Carpathia took at least 2 hours to arrive and begin rescuing the remaining passengers, almost all of which survived in the first place by remaining on lifeboats and out of the water entirely. So surely, trial's over, right? I mean, this is ironclad. There is no way to endure the cold for that long at that intensity and survive. You look at it and think, wow, this argument is unsinkable. Allow me then to call the smoking iceberg to the stand. I present to you, Your Honor, Wim Hof, the Iceman. Mr. Hof is an author, motivational speaker, and ultra-athlete that has previously broken numerous cold and ice-related world records, including longest swim under ice, longest duration of full-body contact with ice, fastest half marathon barefoot on ice or snow, and the first person to climb to Everest Base Camp in only shorts. Thanks to Mr. Hof and other popular scientists like Andrew Huberman, cold water exposure has recently been making a huge resurgence online.
It's gonna take a minute for this to fill up.
In part due to its many benefits, including increased alertness, immune response, blood circulation, faster metabolism, and muscle recovery. Though when entering the water initially, the body experiences a so-called cold shock response, which, according to the US National Weather Service, causes an immediate panic, fear, or stress reaction that then impairs clear thinking and decision-making.
Oh my god.
Sounds pretty similar to what Jack and Rose were going through. Studies have shown that if you can make it past the initial cold shock response, which also causes your heart rate to increase and your breathing to accelerate uncomfortably, the experience can actually end up being quite enjoyable, especially over repeated short-term 1 to 3 minute exposures. The cold shock response will lessen and the benefits will amplify. But what's the Iceman's secret? Surely Mr. Hof and all these other superhuman cold endurers must have some kind of secret recipe or formula that no one else has access to.
A different way of breathing.
That it is all in the mind.
Just follow the breath.
Breathing?
Namely through breath work.
Just breathe in.
It's literally just breathing, which I'm sure I don't need to tell you, Jack and Rose can do as well. So what am I implying then? Could it have just been that the cold water was actually good for Jack and Rose, and they hadn't listened to enough Wim Hof and Joe Rogan and Huberman Lab to actually understand all the benefits to make it through to the other side? I feel like kinda, maybe, sort. We established earlier that there is unequivocally enough space and buoyancy force to keep the pair up and out of the water indefinitely. And given that they have a window of about 15 to 45 minutes to both get up onto the door and then an hour and a half to 2 hours before help arrives, if they find the door and get themselves up quickly enough, survival, and perhaps a little dopamine boost as well, is absolutely on the table. So exactly how much time do they spend in the water before finding the door in the actual film itself? Let's look at the tape. Your Honor, they're in the water for a grand total of 2 minutes. Almost to the second. There's no cutting, time jumping, nothing. We're with them the whole time. They're in the water for 2 minutes before they find the door and could theoretically get up and out of the water well before they started experiencing the effects of hypothermia, meaning that there is a way that Jack and Rose could brave the cold and float on the door together and experience the benefits of a cold plunge. In fact, in cross-examination, we'll find that the state witness, Mr. Cameron, also found this in his documentary. But none of the clickbait articles that obviously didn't watch it would tell you that. He and his team found that there is a so-called best case scenario in which Jack and Rose could float together on the raft with their cores out of the water and remain that way indefinitely, even when accounting for all the previous time spent in the water up till that point.
He got into a place where if we projected that out, he just might have made it.
And he's even using fresh water, which we established isn't even as floaty.
Final verdict? Jack might have lived.
So why then did he come to a different conclusion? Why is he still so adamant that Jack couldn't fit on the door? Because, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this whole thing's rigged.
It sort of misses the point.
It's called writing.
Ah yes, the prosecution's ace in the hole. Even if Jack could find enough space on the door, and the door happened to be buoyant enough, and they managed to endure the cold for long enough to be rescued, none of this matters anyway, because in the film, Jack had to die. That's the point. It would be like saying, well, why didn't Romeo wait another 5 seconds before drinking the poison? Or why did Tony wait another 5 seconds before killing Chino? Or why does this 100-year-old vampire insist on hanging around a high school for the entirety of his life? Because the script calls for it to happen. It's a movie. That's the story the author wants to tell us. In this case, all a story that Rose tells us about what happened when she was on the Titanic and fell in love with a homeless kid and such about the power of love and the will to live and blah blah blah. However, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I must ask you, what if this entire thing was just that? A story told from Rose's perspective. Allow me to conjecture. Over the course of this trial, we've established beyond all reasonable doubt how, given the pair's height, weight, and material from which the door is constructed, they would undoubtedly fit, float, and survive on the door together, and perhaps even experience some mild euphoric effects from their little 2-minute polar bear swim while they waited for rescue. So if this is all the case, if he could survive, then why didn't he? James Cameron is a very smart and talented filmmaker. Look at all his awards and accolades and billions of box office dollars. He surely must know this. We can't just chalk all this up to, well, it says in the script he has to die, so he does. In that case, we might as well throw a giant floating bouncy castle into the water and still have Jack die. It wouldn't have made any sense, and neither does this. Things aren't adding up, and there's a reason for that, Your Honor. We're all thinking it.
So that old woman, she's just a liar, right?
The entire movie is told from her point of view. And I mean, has anyone verified this witness's credibility? Why does Jack only attempt to climb up onto the door once before giving up? Why does she promise not to let go of him and then immediately let go of him?
In the famous line, you say, "I'll never let you go, Jack." But you do.
I lied.
Why was Jack so supposedly willing and ready to sacrifice his life for a woman he met just a few days ago? And why does he say that winning that poker game was the greatest thing that ever happened to him when he's literally being frozen alive as a direct result of winning that poker game? Is he stupid? And why does Kate Winslet keep flip-flopping when asked about this very pressing matter in interviews?
What's your attitude about that silly question after all these years?
It's ridiculous, isn't it? Look, we could have all fitted on.
Yeah.
I don't fucking know.
So he just should have tried harder to get on that door.
That's the answer, is that I don't fucking know.
What if this whole thing isn't an objective historical account, but an alibi for a murderer who pushed a young homeless boy into the Arctic Ocean to save herself, and is only telling us that he couldn't have fit on the door and he nobly sacrificed himself so she didn't have to live with the horror of what she had done. Think about it, my dear jury. In the midst of a mass hysteria, submerged to the neck in ice water, Rose's brain was experiencing the cold shock response. And as we established earlier, in such a panicked state of mind, it's difficult to think rationally. So Rose, in her fear, seeing Jack attempt to get up onto the door once and having it tip over, must have in that moment experienced some pretty insane regret for not staying on the lifeboat earlier. She didn't know how likely it was for them to be able to float on the door together. She hadn't done the math, we had. Rose then decided her only course of action was to commit second-degree murder by pushing him off the raft into the cold depths below to save her own life, and has since told us and Mr. Cameron this twisted version of events to alleviate herself of the guilt and the shame of this terrible act. Just listen to what Rose says here.
And I've never spoken of him until now, not to anyone.
We never found anything on Jack. There's no record of him at all.
He exists now only in my memory. A woman's heart is a deep ocean.
Ocean of secrets? Are you kidding me? This is clearly an impulsive woman, desperate to escape her former life, willing to leave her husband at a moment's notice, to run away with another man she met a few days ago. So who's to say she wouldn't have impulsive thoughts of murder the moment she thought she didn't have a chance of survival? The Titanic sank in 1912, and we are now well past the statute of limitations for second-degree murder. Presumably. I wouldn't know. I'm not a real lawyer. But we do know that had he been given the opportunity, young Jack could have gone on to live a long and illustrious life. But alas, here we are. In this timeline, Rose lives, and Jack never gets old. Much like Leo's girlfriends, I rest my case. So what's the verdict? What case should I take on next? Let me know in the deliberation room down below. I'm a one-man legal firm, and I spend over 100 hours on these videos every month. So please consider subscribing and becoming a member of the jury so I can continue practicing fake law full-time.